Welcome to this special presentation of WYLN, Papal Insights, a look at Vatican procedure and a discussion on the future of the Catholic Church. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce my very special guest, His Excellency, the Most Reverend Joseph C. Bambera, the Bishop of the Diocese of Scranton. Thank you, Bishop, for allowing us to be here today.
Thanks, Lisa. It's a real pleasure to have you here, and I'm very happy to be a part of this day.
Well, we all know that everyone is still talking about the unexpected news, the resignation of Pope Benedict XVI. What was your reaction when you heard the news?
I was exercising on an elliptical machine around 10 after 6 that morning, and I was watching news, and there was a lead into a commercial, and they said, when we return, there's breaking news from the Vatican. I didn't really give it much a thought. I thought perhaps there might be some change in one of the dioceses surrounding the Scranton Diocese here in Pennsylvania. And when I discovered what it was, I was amazed, I was shocked, I was in somewhat of a state of confusion. This doesn't happen, or it certainly hasn't happened for hundreds of years in the Church. And then events began to unfold, and we became familiar with the reasons underlying Pope Benedict's decision to step down at this point in the Church.
Being in the clergy, people would probably think, well, maybe you had an inkling that this was coming, or there had been some rumor, but everyone was just as floored as we were. Everybody was. Interestingly enough, the very next day, I had the opportunity to be at a gathering of a number of bishops for the installation of a new bishop in the Diocese of Camden, New Jersey. And I was walking into a reception with the Papal Nuncio, Archbishop Vigano, and we began to chat about the events of the previous day. And clearly, from his sharing of his thoughts and sentiments about it, it was very obvious to me that indeed everyone was taken back by this decision. And it was one that was very, very closely guarded and just shared with a small number of the Pope's closest associates and colleagues. Well, now that we have all come to believe that this is truly happening, what do you see as the atmosphere among members of your fellow clergy?
I think for the most part, once people realized the reasons that the Holy Father gave, most precisely and singularly his age, his diminished capacity because of age and perhaps some health issues, although it doesn't seem as though there's anything more significant than that which would be the result of age, people began to realize that this was a wise decision on his part, a very selfless type of decision on his part. I found it rather interesting. One of the commentators raised a question in the days following the Pope's resignation, or announcement of it, I should say, about whether or not Pope Benedict would be involved in the election of his predecessor and try to continue to stay connected with the events at the top of the Church in terms of its leadership and its direction as they move forward with a new Pope. And the spokesperson out of the Holy See said if the Holy Father wanted to have an influence, he would have stayed Holy Father.
I heard that
He
as well.
would have stayed the Pope. So I think clearly when we begin to look at the events that led to this decision, they are noble reasons. The Holy Father, at 85 plus years, soon to be 86, simply did not feel that he had it within him to lead the Church at this point in time, that it needed someone with more energy, more capacity, given the demands of age and office that were placed upon him.
Now all the discussion is on the process itself and how we will come to have a new pope. So for any of our viewers that may not be familiar with what exactly the process is, could you explain it to us in layman's terms so that everyone would understand how difficult a process this is and why it takes so long to do something like this, a length that we really don't know how long it will be?
The process is, on the surface, rather both complicated and simple. Mm-hmm. The simple part of it is the cardinal electors, and there are 115 of them. There are more cardinals than that, but only those cardinals who are under 80 years of age are eligible to vote. They gather in conclave, that's the term that we use for it, and they cast ballots for the individual that they feel is most qualified, that is most in their mind and through their prayer set apart by God to lead the church. A 2/3 majority is needed, and once a particular candidate has the 2/3 majority, the burning of the ballots gives off white smoke as opposed to the black smoke, and we have a pope. Habemus Papum. Those are the words in Latin that are announced from the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. The complicated part is that the individuals who will vote for pope look really amongst themselves. Many people ask, well, who can be elected pope? Well, technically speaking, any baptized Catholic male can be, who has attained the age of reason.
I did not know that until recently.
In point of fact, while that seems very, very broad, because the Pope is also Bishop of Rome, this particular man, if he were not ordained, an ordained cleric would have to be ordained a deacon, priest, and then bishop. That would also mean that he couldn't be married. So we begin to see it limited and whittled down just a bit. But quite practically speaking, in most every conclave in recent and distant past, it has been a cardinal who has been elected the successor of Peter. There have been some instances where it's been a bishop, but in the vast, vast majority of cases, it are those bishops who have been then raised to being cardinals in the church. So the complexity of the process really redounds to the time and effort and energy that it takes for the electors to begin to sense who would be best qualified to succeed Benedict XVI as the next pope. Individuals can't campaign for that job. It's not like they can put signs up around the Vatican or wear buttons or anything of that sort. But practically speaking, right now what the cardinals are doing as they gather in Rome, and to my knowledge a date has not yet been established for the conclave, although that is likely to be done in the next day or two, I imagine. Right now the cardinals are meeting. They began meeting yesterday, and they will continue to meet until such time as the conclave, the election process, begins. And what will they do during this time of conversation? And that's really what it is.
That was my next question.
they will, clearly they will begin and end and intersperse their process with prayer. This is a sacred process that cardinals take very, very seriously. Many of these men who are serving in the College of Cardinals, I think close to about half of them have been appointed by Pope Benedict. They have never been a part of a conclave before, and a small number who have been appointed by Pope John Paul II have been, obviously, when Pope Benedict was elected. But this is a first opportunity for them, and I can assure you, knowing many of these cardinals, at least particularly those from the United States, they'll take this opportunity and this responsibility very, very seriously. This may, in fact, be the one time in their lives that they have the opportunity to clearly influence and affect the future of the church as we move forward. So what will they do? They will gather at meetings during which they will discuss what the needs of the church are. Where is the church clearly going at this point in time in 2013? What is necessary for the next pope as he moves forward? They will begin to look at questions of leadership style and skills. They will look at needs of the church right now. Clearly, and it goes without even questioning, the whole sex abuse scandal that rocked the church beginning particularly in 2002 and has been in the news ever since, will be a focus. The zero tolerance that we speak about in the United States will clearly emerge as a prevailing way in which to deal with this crisis globally. There will also be a need to consider how in a world fraught with values that are clearly steeped in relativism, how we adhere to the truth of the beliefs of our church and how we communicate those to a world at times that has turned a deaf ear to the values of the Catholic Church. How we translate our message in a contemporary way to our world. The values of the gospel will never change. The teachings of the church are what they are. But a real challenge for this Holy Father will be how we take that teaching, which is stable and unchanging, and how we interpret it and translate it in such a way that our contemporary world understands it so that they can best respond to it. We'll also look at how we deal with young people, how we deal with the church globally. You know, for many, many years, the focus of the church was Western Europe. And suddenly now we realize that it's a global church with cardinal electors from North America, from Africa, from South America, from Oceania, and all over the world, Asia.
I don't understand. I think it's so overwhelming when you talk about like electing someone to head a company that, or maybe something, the President of the United States, but you're talking about all different countries, all different languages, someone that needs to communicate on that level as well. So how important of a role is it that this person be able to speak multiple languages?
Yeah, it's clearly a very, very significant element that will be considered by the cardinal electors. I think it's probably fair to say that many of our recent Holy Fathers had a facility with not just Latin or Italian, since most of them in recent memory and history up until Pope John Paul II were Italian. Pope John Paul II came from Poland, Pope Benedict came from Germany. Some had facility with Italian, with Latin, and probably another one or two languages, maybe Spanish, some English. But clearly today, that's a very significant part of this whole process. Just think, a person being elected with no facility with the Italian language. And the Pope is Bishop of Rome, so he comes out on that balcony and can't speak to his own people. It would be like me only knowing how to speak Polish, the land of my ancestors. So I'm set apart to serve the people of the Diocese of Scranton, and I can't speak their language. That would be a real disadvantage. So clearly that's a very important part of the selection process. I think there's also another aspect of this that we can't discount, that there is a need, at least as has been expressed to among many of the cardinal electors, that they look carefully at the ability and the quality of discussion and communication amongst many of the different offices in the Holy See that run the Universal Church. The whole WYLN scandal that unfolded this past year is evidence of the need for there to be a sense of openness and cooperation and a willingness to work with the broader church.
It's going to be an overwhelming process, I'm sure. I guess, how important of a role is it also for this Pope? We see the families changing here in the United States, across the world. Family unit isn't what it was. When we were growing up as children, religion was pretty much foremost in our lives. You dictated what you did by your religion. You know, my mother told me you couldn't do this on a Sunday or whatever. We see some families falling away from that, and maybe the young people aren't coming to the church as much anymore. How difficult of a role is that going to be for the new Pope also, to try to attract the younger people into the church and back to the church and strengthen that family unit?
Clearly, that is the responsibility of any bishop today, to determine ways in which we can best evangelize and proclaim the message of Jesus. That is indeed a huge responsibility for the next Holy Father, for the next Pope. But I think your question also bespeaks of a perspective that many people have maintained, perhaps almost erroneously so. We think of the church in terms of Western Europe, in terms of our own experience here in North America with perhaps a diminishment of individuals adhering to the faith, a breakdown of family life and structure, and that's true.
Not so elsewhere.
And we need to address that. But the reality is, the church is not diminishing globally. The church is clearly growing in Africa and particularly in Central and South America. That's why many individuals will ask the question, is it time now for an African pope? Is it opportune now that we elect a pope from Latin America? Is it time for a third world pope? We'll leave that up to the cardinal electors.
What are your feelings on that? Do you think that there is a huge possibility that will be the outcome?
I think there are. I think several things are clearly on the table at this point. With the election of John Paul II in 1978, suddenly it was no longer necessary to look to an Italian to serve as Bishop of Rome and Pontiff of the Universal Church. That was followed by Benedict, also from Western Europe, but nonetheless a non-Italian. As we look at the makeup of the College of Cardinals, which is incredibly diverse from all those areas that I just spoke about, it may very well be the perception of those who are electing that it would suit the church best to have someone come from a part of the church that is clearly emerging in a vital and life-giving way.
On a more personal question, I know that you've had the opportunity to meet with two of the past popes, Pope John Paul II
Mm-hmm.
and also Pope Benedict, who was responsible for you becoming a bishop. So for the person who, like myself, has never had an audience with a pope, maybe some people have had a papal blessing for their wedding and that's the closest they've come. Tell us what it's like to be in the presence of our pope.
I think for anybody, whether you are a layperson or you are in a position of authority in the church, as I am in our local church, the Diocese of Scranton, as bishop, it is always something very humbling. It is always something incredibly inspiring. I had the opportunity to meet Pope Benedict on two different occasions, one shortly after I was ordained bishop and installed here in Scranton. I was in Rome for about a month for a training period, if you will, for new bishops from around the world. And we met him briefly during that time. I had the opportunity to spend a considerable amount, a longer amount of time with him when I joined with other bishops from the dioceses of Pennsylvania for our ad limina visit. That's a visit that takes place every 5 years, and every diocese needs to report, if you will, on the state of their diocese when they meet with the Holy Father. So I had that opportunity. And certainly it was an inspiring experience for me. One of the things that was most interesting to me in light of his resignation, and this picture right next to me is from that meeting, the Holy Father was incredibly focused. He was aware of things that were going on in Pennsylvania. He clearly knew about the Penn State crisis. He made reference to that in one of the discussions with Bishop Barczyk from Altoona Johnstown that covers State College. But one of the things that struck us all was that a year ago he looked exhausted, and his voice was soft, clear, precise in terms of what he communicated, but clearly very tired and fatigued. As we look back on that experience, I don't think one of us were really taken aback by his announcement, even though initially it was a surprise.
What have your faithful been saying, the people who come to church and that? Are they accepting of what has happened? You know, some people I've spoken with in the past, I'm very surprised that a pope would step down. We've never seen this in our lifetime. What are the faithful saying?
People are surprised, but they very quickly came to appreciate the depth of his humility and his ultimate desire to support the church. The day that he finally left office, February 28th, I celebrated Mass in our cathedral, and I quoted from very, very brief words that he shared when he was elected and he came out onto the balcony of St. Peter's for the first time as Pope. He said, "The Lord has chosen me, a humble worker in his vineyard, and the Lord has chosen to use me with my inadequacies to lead the church." What a great spirit of humility and service he not only represented on that balcony in those words, but that he has shown throughout his tenure as Holy Father, and most vividly in this decision to step away from the most powerful position in the church, and arguably one of the most powerful positions in the world, to simply move into a different mode of life and to hand the reins over to somebody else. The vast sense of perspective that I believe is offered to this from many, many of the people that I've had the opportunity to talk with is that this will serve as a wonderful, wonderful gift to the church. That yes, we serve as much as we possibly can and as selflessly as we can. But when there is a need for one who has more energy, strength, and ability than we, then we humbly step aside and we let somebody else take over. I clearly think with John Paul II, that was a watershed moment in terms of broadening the opportunity for those who would be elected Pope well beyond Italy. In the gesture that Pope Benedict offered to the Church in his resignation, I won't say that every Pope will follow suit. Mm-hmm. I will never be surprised if they do.
It was tremendous courage that he exemplified to do something like that. It would be different if it had been done in our lifetime, that we've seen it happen before. But I believe it was, exemplary courage that was displayed. We are in the Lenten season right now, so we began with one Pope, and hopefully we will celebrate Easter Sunday with another Pope. Mm-hmm. Does that impact our Lenten season in any way, or does it make us stronger because of it? Because now everyone is more engaged in prayer, praying for a new leader.
I oftentimes say that we think of Lent as a time to give up. The first part of giving up something is give, mm-hmm. isn't it? And what has the Pope given us but a wonderful example of what it means to be a disciple of the Lord, to humbly serve, and to do that in the best way that one can believe that we are, fulfilling the Lord's commands. I think he's a great example to all of us of how we should all live our lives. And that's what Lent is all about, to reflect upon who we are as followers of the Lord and to do the best that we can through the sacrifice of this season to reflect upon ways in which we might best give and serve the Lord. And he's done that very well.
When we see a new Pope named, we look at ourselves and it may not have a direct impact, on us, but you working as a member of the clergy in that, do you see anything changing anytime soon when a new Pope is named, or will there be a gradual transition? How do you see it happening?
I think people often look at an opportunity like this and they wonder what kind of changes there will be. I said a moment ago in our conversation, the message of the gospel is not going to change. The teachings of the church are not going to change. In that respect, nothing will be new, nor should they. Those are timeless teachings and truths that have been given to us by the Lord himself. They are teachings and truths that have carried us well for 2,000 years and will do so into the future. What will change is a style, a person, and perhaps the ways in which we proclaim the message. So it is both exciting, but it is also very consoling to know that that which is true continues and will ever and always continue in the church.
And this may be a silly question, but I will ask it. When a new Pope is named, do all the bishops then go to meet with him?
No, actually not. Those who are in Rome, those who are perhaps able to be there, those who both work there or have been a part of this elective process will indeed be there. I don't anticipate doing that. I've not been called to Rome, and I'm happy to celebrate and pray for the new Holy Father back here in northeastern Pennsylvania.
So what is your take on all of this right now as we're winding down our conversation? Do you have any inkling in your heart as to how long of a process this will be? Or do you think people are quite focused, the cardinals going in before the conclave starts now? Do you think it will be a short process, or can we expect a lengthy one? And an important point to bring out that you told me before we even started this interview, that what was the longest that you recall of a conclave taking?
Well, certainly not one that I recall,
well,
but from my
reading.
memory of church history, I believe that there was one conclave that went on for several years. I don't anticipate that happening at all. I also don't believe that this will be a conclave that will be over in a day. I think certainly the longer time that's allotted for the cardinals to come to know one another and to discern where the Spirit is leading them, that may indeed shorten the conclave. But I suspect it will take some bit of time before they coalesce around the candidate that they believe the Lord is calling them to elect.
Is everyone a candidate, like that is in the church right now? Or
Of
do
the
they
of
have...
the College of Cardinals?
Is like just, are there people who say they're not interested, or is that not proper protocol? Like, do people know if they're a candidate, or is everyone
Well, you know, there's
one?
an old saying, and you've probably heard it many times over, that the cardinal who goes into a conclave thinking that he's going to be pope is sure to come out as a cardinal. So if there is a desire on somebody's part to aspire to this office, I think if he were prudent, he wouldn't let that be known to too many individuals. I think his life, his ministry, his works will speak best for his capacity to assume that role.
Well, we're running out of time here very shortly. In conclusion, Bishop, I guess, what message would you have for the people as we await to hear who the future leader will be of the Roman Catholic Church?
I would certainly encourage the faithful to pray for the cardinal electors and to pray for the Church, to give thanks for the blessing of Pope Benedict, and indeed to give thanks for the blessing of this wonderful ministry that's given to the Church of Peter, the successor of Peter, who really is a source of great unity, and who, in the many different individuals who have occupied that role, 265 thus far since the beginning, have been a great, great source of consolation for the Church as we move to the future.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for your time and to wish you a happy and blessed Easter.
Thank you.
And we look forward to talking with you after we know who our next Pope will be.
Thank you. Blessings to you as well, Lisa.
Thank you very much. His Excellency, the Most Reverend Joseph C. Bambera, Bishop of the Diocese of Scranton. You are watching a special WYLN presentation, Papal Insights, a look at the Vatican procedure and a discussion on the future of the Catholic Church. Thank you for joining us.